Everyone, and welcome back to Painting with Martin. Today we're going to continue our painting series from Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion series, and we're actually looking at Hatchet here. It's a beautiful figure, and as you can see here from its weapons, the mini axes on the miniature, it's called Hatchet for a reason. I'm going to show you how to paint this miniature in three basic easy steps. First, we're going to put on the base coat, then we're going to put on some shades, and then finally some finishing touches and highlights. I've already primed this miniature in a grey-white primer, and also taken the liberty to actually put on an additional layer of paint with a thin layer of Vallejo's white grey. And I've done so simply to make sure it sticks even better to plastic, because I found that the primer didn't stick entirely to the model the way I wanted it. And you can do the same thing again. Sometimes that happens. I'm going to try to finish this video in about 30 minutes. Sometimes I fail, and that's because I'm not very good with planning my day, and I'm even worse planning miniatures and painting. So this is a very, very brown and leathery model when it comes to the colors, and I'm going to try to stick as much as possible to the original card art. So with that said, I'm going to first cover the cloak here, as well as the kind of like upper parts of the cloak, and then I'll go on to the boots. For that for the cloak, I've chosen to use a mix of three colors. First, I've used Dryad Bark from Citadel, mixed in about one part of Dryad Bark, 2 parts of Skrag Brown from Citadel, as well as a tiny bit of Mournfang Brown from Citadel. I've chosen these three colors simply to make sure that I get a nice and kind of not too dark color. And let's see, this is the way I'm going to put it on. So taking a size 2 brush, and I'm going to put it across the entire cloak. And you may need actually 1 or 2, 3 layers. I'm going to try to make sure it covers with 2 layers. So once it's dried, you put on the same color over again. And you do that. Of course, I mix in my paint with about 50% water to make sure that we don't soak the miniature with the paint and obscuring some of the details here. It's a very detailed miniature. I haven't played the board game yet. It's on the list for me to do, but unfortunately I have so many board games to play, and maybe one day I'll show you a small collection of my library. If there is any miniatures or games that you really want me to paint, let me know in the comments below. And with that said, I'm really deeply grateful to those of you who have already subscribed. If you're new to the channel, or if you know someone who really likes to paint or likes to learn how to paint, please actually hit that subscribe button below here, so you won't miss any of the next miniatures that I actually will be painting. And also, if you like this video, click the like button. Why don't you do that right now? And I'm not sponsored by any company or brushes or anything like that. If I was, that would be great. Maybe I would get sponsors one day. But in the meantime, it's just me and my brushes. Now we're going over the cloak here. Don't worry if you will actually cover the buttons over here. We will actually cover them later on as well. As you can see here, if I zoom in here, the buttons are not actually obscured that much because I've thinned the paint. And that makes it really easy. If you make mistakes, just go back and cover them again. If you think that it's too much of brown, you can mix in this one and change the setting of the paints and mix in a little bit less, perhaps of Mournfang Brown, and more of another color of your choice. I painted this miniature once before, and I can't remember exactly which paints I used. It was for a friend of mine, and actually for a friend of mine has actually lent me these models right now, so I can show you how to paint these things for the channel. Don't forget the little thing in between here. I don't know how it's called in English. As you can see, it's already started to dry fairly well, as well as the inner sides of the cloak here. don't forget the outer parts here as well. Something like this. And almost done here. This miniature has plenty of weapons, mostly axes. He's holding one axe in each hand, but you also can see his whole is tucked in one axe in each on each side of the belt. They're very easy to miss, and also furthermore there are two hatches further down on the, if I standing here on this part of the leg. So don't if you look at the card art most of all, if you do that you can actually see where the axes will be, and you can try to identify them so you don't paint them over with the brown color. It's very easy to do so. I've done so many times myself when I tried out the miniature, and it's the axes here that will really make this this cloak here stand out as well, or this miniature stand out. And there you have it, looking a bit like this. It can be a little bit tricky getting parts of the paint in between these areas up above here next to the neck, but you can do it. For the next part we're going to paint the boots, and I've chosen to paint them in a kind of lighter fashion according to the card art, using some pure Skrag Brown mixed in with a little bit of water. So I'm going to give it a good shake the bottle, make sure that the pigments don't stay at the bottom of the paint, and then I'm going to mix it up on my palette here. I'm using an old brush to do this with, so make sure I actually don't do that with my nice finer brushes that I used for the miniature. And of course I'm also going to mix it in with a little bit of water. I'm mixing it in here on the side of the table, making sure that there's plenty of space for me here. It's always good to do that because in case you flip the bottle or something like that. So holding it up like this, and the boots come on in the color like this. Now, I want you to be really careful because you see there's a little thing here sticking out of the boot, and I want you to make sure that this one is not covered by the paint on both sides. Now, this is what it looks like when it's more or less finished, and I should also mention that I forgot to paint the cloak colors as the same part of the inner back side of the cloak. I should have done that, and you should do that too. This is what the boots look like. I put them with about 2 to 3 thin layers of paint, and now I'm going to put some paint on this part of the kind of like his garment, whatever it is. For this one I'm going to use some pure XV-88 from Citadel, which is kind of a light color, which puts it in a very nice contrasting way to the darker parts. And I'm only going to paint these parts of the cloaks with this color as for now. So as always, I'm mixing this one with a little bit of water, taking great care not to spill the bottle, of course. And it's a nice color from Citadel, and mixing it out on my mixing table on the side here, you will actually see it on these pots and this part of my painting board here. Using the same brush as I did before, a size 2. You can also use a size 3 if it's more comfortable for you. It's a thin coat, and you can see I really want to make sure that all the folds and flaps are actually seen through this coat. That's why the coat is very, very thin. You might even be a little bit too thin, so you might want to add some more XV-88 to it at your convenience. And if you see it's like kind of like flaking off here, that's why it's so thin, and it's almost acting as kind of like a wash, but it's not that thin. You can thin it even more, and that's why the thing is, if you don't have these washes that I'm talking about, you can thin the paints that I'm using right now, and using as mixing them in with a lot of part of the water, and you can actually use them as kind of as shades or washes as well. Don't forget all the sides of the flaps, the folds. I would give this about 2 to 3 thin coats, leaving them to dry in between. And we are going to darken this one with a bit of a wash or shade later on as well. Something like this. Now it looks kind of like this. All the inner sides have been almost dried, and we're going to go on and paint some of the parts of the arm here, as well as the inside of the cloaks, as well as in the middle there's a small spot here as well. So for that one I'm using a color called Averland Sunset from Citadel. It's a very thick color, so I've diluted it as well, of course, with some water, and I'm going to make sure that I'm trying not to touch the previous areas that we've already painted. So I'm going to try to touch it up over here. And Averland Sunset is a color that is not entirely yellow and not entirely brown either. And that's why it's very suitable for this one, because we can actually, when the shade comes in, and you will see that, and I hope it works out the way I planned, you can see that it will give you a very, very nice contrast. And of course on the other side here as well. Parts of the arm. Making sure you don't touch actually his fingers, which are going to be in a completely different color. But this part here is actually quite nice and detailed. And as you can see, it blends in quite well if you manage to touch some of the brown areas. It doesn't actually matter that much if you touch it. Something like this, you may need 2 or 3 coats. I'm doing 2 coats. You can do 2 or 3, or if you're lazy or you just want it to get done really quickly, you can just do 1. That's perfectly fine as well. Something like this. Now it's looking quite all right, but we want it to be a little bit better even more. And for that, I've already forgotten that I forget things as well. This part here needs to be in brown, same color as before from the cloak, as well as this part here as well. And I'm going to touch that right now, as you see. So you can see that I make plenty of mistakes as well. As well as on the other side. Something like this. There's still going to be small parts of white on the off areas, but we can cover them with some of the wash, which is not going to be a problem. Now, with that said, with that one done, we're now going to pay some attention to the skin areas. And for the skin areas, I'm going to use a color called Administratum Grey, or you can also use a color called Neutral Grey from Vallejo. My mistake, Mechanical Standard Grey is what I meant. Administratum Grey from Citadel is also perfectly fine, or Neutral Grey from Vallejo if you don't have those colors. And I'm preferring to use a darker color, simply because I want to make sure that we can light it up with some touches afterwards. And I'm applying this one fairly a little bit diluted with about 50-50 water, as always, because I don't want to obscure any details. And you should do the same as well. The face is fairly obscured in the card art, so it doesn't really matter if you make lots of mistakes up here. You can leave it grey as well, but I'm going to touch it up a little bit more as it goes along. Don't forget that it has a front side and a back side. So it has a back side over here, making great care that you don't touch actually too much of the cloak we just painted. If you touch the brim of the hat, that's not a problem. We can touch that up later. Right now it looks very, very bad, but don't worry, we are going to fix it up once we've applied the wash, and we're going to do some finishing touches afterwards. For the hands, or they're looking more like claws in the card art, also for the same color. And here it's quite important not to touch the yellow area that we just painted. So, Mechanicus Standard Grey, painting the face and the hands, or the claws, as the more looking like. I don't know if it's a sheep character or some kind of like barbarian. I don't know. If you know, tell me in the comments. I'm angling this so I can reach. And I will show you to you in a second. And it looks a bit like this. All right. I'm sure I'm going to turn it around as well. We of course got some work still left to do. We've got to paint the inner trousers, as well as some parts of of course the hatches, the belt, of course the hat, the kind of like the buckle up here, and of course the arrows and the thing for the arrows as well. So right now I'm going to focus my attention on the I forgot one part here. These parts here of the the boots will be painted with Averland Sunset as well. So I'll touch that up as I go in a bit. But then I will also touch up some inner sides of this area here, as well as now we're going to put our attention on the hatchets and the weapons. As you can see here, I've also taken the liberty to paint the horns with Mechanicus Standard Grey as well. because that's also part of the grey colour. Now for the handles of the axes, I've chosen a colour that some of you may be familiar with called, what is it? Flat Earth from Vallejo, which is a Vallejo colour. I try to mix them a little bit around. This is a very Citadel focused miniature. I'm painting the handles with this one, and of course both the handles, including on this side here, because there's going to be a small handle on this side too. Make sure that you paint that too, as well as another handle inside here. It's a little bit hard to reach, but you can, as well as two handles here on the side as well. Also needs to be painted. And you can, if you want to, paint them with a metal color, but I prefer actually to paint them with a brownish color to make sure they're made out of wood, because I want into making sure that he comes kind of from a woodland scenery. It's a little bit fiddly to get to reach everywhere you should be, but with a little bit of practice you can do it. Something like that. And I'm going to continue it and show you in a bit. A bit like this. When you're finished, make sure that you can point out these little dots here for the axe handles, as well as all the axes. As I said, they can be quite difficult to find. Now we're going to put some paint on the quiver, which I called the arrow holder before, which I have no idea why I did that. I've chosen another color from Vallejo for this one, and it's called red leather, mixed in with a bit of water, about 50%. If you think this one is too brownish, you can use another color. Mornthing brown is quite nice, but I want to make sure that it contrasts off with the rest of the cloak. So diluted with about 50% water to not obscure any details. This quiver will require 2 coats. You're not going to paint the arrows yet, but if you're already on with it, you can paint them Skrag Brown from Citadel. The paint is very, very fluid right now, but I'm going to give it a thicker coat in a bit. Now with that one done, you can paint Skrag Brown as well for the arrows. And this one can be painted almost undiluted. You can dilute them if you want to. Make sure you don't leave any white spots from the base coat or from the primer stage. And turning it around, making sure that you don't actually cover anything else. You can switch the model around like what I did here. Can be a bit fiddly to get into the smaller parts of the detail here, but I believe you can do it. You might miss an arrow too. You can touch it up as you go, or you can do it later on. You may want to turn it around to get all the angles of the miniature. With that one done, we've got very few parts left of the base coat. I will try to keep it to 30 minutes. I might have to increase it to 40 minutes for this painting. Leave it to dry completely before you apply the second base coat. Now, before that, we can actually put some attention to the hat. And the hat is quite nice. I'm going to put it with some pure XV-88 to contrast off with the rest of the colour. You can mix in XV-88 with a bit of Steel Legion drab if you want to, which is, I'm going to try to do this. I've never done this before, and we'll see how that one turns out. Give it a good shake, or two. So maybe use 3 parts XV-88 and 1 part Steel Legion drab, just to tone it down a little bit. And as always, dilute it with a bit of water. And here we have the experimental coat. Make sure you don't touch the horns, and also the kind of like the band here on top of the hat. For underneath the hat, you can coat it pure Rhinox hide, because it's a very dark, or even Dryad Bark from Citadel, because it's also a very dark color, and you can do so undiluted if you like. It can also be a bit fiddly to get behind the horns here. You might actually touch the horns as well. I mean, you can touch that up with some pure Mechanicus Standard Grey when you're done. Now, for the band, I've seen people paint it Macrich blue, but from the card art it's very hard to tell. But in the meantime, I'm going to put some where's the colour? No, Dryad Bark. Where is? Well, we can do Dryad Bark, which is fine for the undercoat of the brim of the hat. Oops, got a little bit there. This is really important not to cover parts of the face. As you can see here, I'm wiping it off with my finger. You can do that as well if you just touch it up. And it's a good way to work yourself from the inside and out. I'm going to turn it around here, make sure that I don't actually miss a spot. The hat is a very nice focal point of the miniature. So I'm putting some extra attention to it. I'm going to touch up the hat on the back side here as well, but now since the quiver has almost entirely dried, I'm going to give it a slightly thicker base coat with red leather, and then I'm going to pay my attention to the headband, which I'm going to put in another brownish color, I believe. When it comes to the belt, as well as the thing on top next to the face, I'm choosing US Field Drab from Citadel, from Vallejo, which is a kind of like a military color. And I've switched my brush to a size 0 to make sure that I can get the details. Field Drab is one of Citadel's, Vallejo's military colors, mostly used for Flames of War and like war games. But in this case, since this whole miniature is so focused on the dark brown colors, I thought it would be a nice way to touch it up. And if you miss some spots, you can even paint over the belt buckle here as well. We're going to paint it in a different color when it's actually when the shade has been done. So something like this. Now we're going to take our attention to the band here, which I've decided not to go for actually a brownish color. I'm going to paint it instead of Naggaroth Night, which is kind of like a purple color. Will give it quite a lot of focus on the miniature, and give it a bit shake and apply it as it is, undiluted this time. It's going to be a little bit tricky because I really don't want to cover anything else with it. That's why I'm holding my hands very close to the bristles to make sure that I have maximum control. And I'll switch it around, working myself from the outside to the inside. And then on the back side as well. Something like this. It will be covered up with a wash a bit later on as well, or shade. Now we're going to put our attention to the hatches here, finally. For this one, we're going to use some oily steel or lead belcher from either Citadel or Vallejo, your choice. And then we're almost done with the base paint. And painting this undiluted, I'm starting with the smaller hatchets and the belt and working myself out. And then going to the hatchets on the side here. Can be a bit tricky to spot, but once you've actually painted this, you can see what you actually missed and then cover the rest with brown. That's one axe. Here, followed by another axe beneath it. And of course the large axe here on, which is holding in his hands. And I'll do the same, of course, for the other side. This is what it looks like when you've finished painting all the axes. You can see from the side there are two here. There's one main axe that is holding in each hand. There's a small axe here on the side, and there's an axe in either side of the belt. Now, the only thing that we've actually got left to paint here is actually the trousers. And the trousers, if you look at the card art, they're actually kind of green or a little bit of purplish. So I'm going to actually use something called Warpstone Glow from Citadel. And I know that's a controversial choice looking at other people who have painted this one, but I'm going to stick to it, and I'm going to show you how to actually paint it up so it doesn't actually stand out that much. And I'm using my size 0 brush for this one. And I'm also applying it a little bit diluted, not that much. And I hope this one actually turns out quite okay. Both the inner thighs here will be applied for this one, using the smallest brush I have to make sure I don't actually touch up any other details like the brown part we painted. That's what it looks like. I highly recommend that you put maybe one or two, at least 2 coats of green Warpstone Glow from Citadel on the trousers. But the last part we're actually going to use before we put the shades on is this little like buckle here, and I'm going to use Retribute armor from that one from Citadel. Oh, there we go. I'm applying this one neat. And it's the last color before we actually put on the shades. So if you stayed with me so far for the 37 minutes of this insanely long painted tutorial, congratulations. If you haven't pressed the like button or subscribe by now, please do so. It really helps my channel grow, and I really appreciate it. So with that one done, and when everything has been dried and everything is right, we're going to go straight into what we call the shades. Welcome back. Now we have the washes. We're going to do for all the metal parts, hands, face, horns, and the belt buckles are going to be painted in or done in with a black wash from Citadel. Vallejo, crazy today. So game wash, black wash from Vallejo, or Nuln Oil from Citadel, perfectly fine as well. We apply it undiluted and selectively. All the metal parts, all the axe blades. Let it pool in the recesses. If it's too much, use a brush to soak it up. Try not to touch anything else. If you do, not a problem, you can fix it up later. As you can see here, I put on too much wash, too much aid, so I'm touching it up. Face is quite important. As well as the horns. Don't need much to actually make it sure it looks really good. But the face will really come out once you put on the wash. All the hard work you put in it is going to pay off. I'm going to show you. Back of the head. Now when that one is done, you should pay some attention to the brown parts, which I've chosen to use only most of it for a sepia shade from Vallejo. I got it right this time. Also undiluted, and I'm going to cover it on all the lighter brown part of the brown. And as you can see here, as well as the yellow. The axe handles, as well as also the boots. And the hat. The inner part of the hat I'm not touching. I'm leaving it as it is. If you want to, you can do that. Make sure that it pulls in all the recesses, gets in all the nooks and crannies. But if you feel that it pulls too much, just use a clean brush or the brush you've been using and soak it up. Or can also be used for this belt buckle here for the metal, toning it down a little bit. When it comes to the rest of the cloak, not the pants of course, which are green, I'm going to use a color a wash called Agric's Earthshade from Citadel, giving it a good shake and applying it undiluted across the rest of the miniature, except for the pants of course. And here you really wanted to cover the brown parts here. I'm going to put some more on my brush. As you can see, all the folds actually now really stands out. And do the same for the quiver, as well as the arrows. As well as the kind of like the little like belt here on top, or holder, or whatever you want to call it. And the insides of the pants. Or actually not the pants, but the cloak. Don't forget, there's some parts here that is very easy to miss. So, I might want to do one more part here. Now, for the green parts of the pants, I'm using Bealtan Green shade from Citadel. Of course, undiluted as well. And I think this one might bring out some of the vibrant colors here. If you don't want such a very green part, you can actually use a Athonian Camo shade as well. And This one turned out to be a little bit too much. So I'm toning it down a little bit, making sure it doesn't pull too much in all the recesses, but some only. Something like this. And final part of the shade is going to be the headband, or not the headband, but the band on top of the hat, which is going to be another shade from Citadel called Druchii Violet. Of course, undiluted as well. From the rest, from the back as well. That concludes the shade part. Now all you have to do right now is to leave it to dry. I'm going to leave it to dry as well. Don't wait for too long. It's going to be back in a few minutes or even a few seconds, because I'm going to put the pause button on my camera. I'm using a regular standard mobile phone camera here. You can do the same if you want to start a YouTube channel. It's really good. Maybe one day when I start getting sponsors or something like that, I'll use a really good camera. But for now, this is what I have. So if the sound is really bad, because I'm trying to use a new microphone today, if the sound is really bad, let me know. If you didn't hear anything at all, well, then you'll just try. I'm going to try to guess a little bit of what I actually did here today, but that would be a real shame. So just keep watching, and it will be back momentarily. And now when you've actually seen that it's dried, it looks like this. A little bit better, but it's still a bit dirty because of the wash. Now we're going to do a dry brush of the cloak. And it's a little bit of controversial choice here, because I've chosen to use XV-88. You can use something called Iraqi sand or buff as well if you just want a light or a weathered look as well. Or you could choose to apply the base coat again using the same color as we did in the beginning of this video. We're coming up to 47 minutes as well, which means that I've already failed you and tried to keep it with below 30 minutes, which I usually do. I'm very, 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 very bad at time management, and that includes in my regular day job as well. So if my manager is listening, please just ignore that. So dry brushing is a nice technique. You put some XV-88 on your brush using an alt brush or a specific dry brush, as I have here, that I got from my local friendly painting supply store. And you wipe off most of the paint off your brush on a piece of kitchen towel here, and you apply it roughly across the entire miniature here, or at least the cloak. So this is what I'm going to do. And the reason for that, for this color, is that I wanted to have a more of a yellowish look from the base coat. I'm going to put it over here. Something like this, and we apply it like this. It gives it a more weathered, dusty look, and I brush it over the edges. So you don't brush it, you can brush it from the upside and down, turning around. And with applying XV-88 over it, it means that it's inside the folds and stuff like that. It's still kept brown, while the outside gives it more of a leathery look. And do it the same underneath here. And also for the Averland Sunset, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to apply the same, but using the original base color, which is Averland Sunset. And I can do the same thing for the boots as well, using of course Skrag Brown, which is this one. Same thing. Wipe off most of the brush, soak it with the paint, wipe most of the brush, the paint off, and apply it across the boots. It will help smooth out the edges, and where the wash pooled too much, you can actually make sure that it actually stays nice and clean. Here I also noticed that there's parts of this one which I should have done before. They're called mold lines. You should take a file and just like try to carve them away. I didn't see this until now, but you should do this in the very first step before you actually put any paint on the brushes. You can also do the same thing here for the quiver and the arrows. And that concludes this the dry brush part. Now we're going to put on some highlights, and this part of the highlight step as well. And we're going to start with the Averland Sunset here, and we're going to apply it neat. That's what you do when you actually apply it from the, so it doesn't run away, or it doesn't become running, and you apply it over the folders only, on the raised edges. If the paint is too thick, you can apply it with a little bit of water, which I'm going to do right now, but normally you don't do this. But my paintbrush has been, it's dried too much. So sometimes Citadel's colors can do that, which means that you might actually have to moisten up the color a little bit, but not too much. Just focusing on the raised edges here. Leaving the shades in the shadowy areas. You can see this part here as well. Working from the inside and out. Now, for the quiver, as well as the boots, I'm applying something called Skrag Brown. I'm applying it neat. Same thing here, I'm trying to look at only the edges. Where the sun would shine. And it's also a nice way of touching up any mistakes you made on the way. Something like that. For the quivers, I do the same thing. Original color, but neat. And for these ones here, the kind of like bands on the quiver, I'm going to use another color to make sure they stand out a little bit more. In this case, I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab from Citadel. Also applying it neat. Of course, cleaning the brush in the meantime, making sure that it's nice and pristine for the colors. You can use another color here of your choice. Here it kind of gives it the impression that it's kind of like leathery straps holding it up. Something like this. For the belt, I'm going to use the same color as before, which is steel US field drab from Vallejo. This time undiluted. And for the axe handles, I'm going to use, of course, Flat Earth from Vallejo, undiluted as well. They're not, it's a very subtle wicks because it's only here that you can actually really see it. And if you want to, you can use some of the arrows here or darts with that color, making sure the top darts are with the other color, which is Skrag Brown, but it's entirely optional. Just gives a little bit of a nicer contrast. Now, some of the focal points here have been the axe handles, or axe blades, which we're going to do right now, and we're going to touch them up with some natural steel from Vallejo. Oops, sorry about that. And you can see there has been some intricate details parts of the miniature here of the axes, so we're going to cover those, try to work ourselves around those so we could keep those nice details as part of the miniature. It's also a good way to any mistakes that you made. You can do that, touch that up right now. Here it's very, you can see that here on the side here. See if we can focus the camera. There you go. And we can also do the same thing here for the buttons on the coat. It will make them stand out, and it's a nice, really nice detail to add. Just dot them with your finest brush. If you think that they shine too much, you can apply a small layer of Nuln Oil or black wash. Also painting some of the handles here as from the card art. It looks quite okay. Now we're going to take some attention now towards the green parts, and we're going to apply the same base color, which is Warpstone Glow from Citadel, before we take our final attention on the hat and the horns and the face. Applying it neat, and again only on the raised areas, on the raised edges. Something like this. Very subtle, but still a nice touch. Now well, this one is drying because we're still not done with them, because we're going to put another color on them, as I said before. And now let's put some attention on these, the face parts, or the skin parts, so to say. I've chosen to use something called a neutral grey from Vallejo, which is a nice color. And I'm going to apply them sparingly on the raised areas of the hands. As well as the raised areas of the face. It's a little bit hard to see here. But I'm painting around on the nose and around it, leaving kind of the mouth a little bit open. If you can see that, something like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the horns here. Painting the top of the horns with this color. You could use a Screaming Skull to paint the horns in a kind of lighter manner. I've done so before as well, but I've chosen to put them in this greyish color to be more with the card art. It means that I'm leaving the original base color and the wash on in the shades, while applying this one and touching up mistakes as I go. Now, for the hat, I'm going to apply. I was a bit unsure how to paint the hat, to be honest, but I'm going to apply a small coat of Steel Legion drab for the brim of the hat, which is a little bit different from the base color. And we'll see how that one turns out, just for the brim here. And the back. It's a very thinned paint right now, so it's kind of like a glaze on top of it, and glaze is it's a super thin paint painted over it, kind of like to highlight the edges it's like about 75% water and 25% paint. With that one done, let's turn our attention to the pants. I've used a Naggaroth Night. I'm going to paint some small streaks of Naggaroth Night up from the edges. Leaving some parts. I'm kind of like dabbing the paint here, almost mixing it with the green to make sure that it's more from the card art. I still want the green to be seen, but much more subtly. I'm covering it with the neat Naggaroth Night and toning down the very strong green colors. I'm going to apply it. You use very, very small amounts of paint on the color on your brush when you do this. It's kind of like a very small and subtle dry brush, but it's a bit hard to reach here. So therefore, I've left some green parts showing there. Now, the only thing left here, besides painting the base of this model, is actually going to be painting a little bit more attention on the detail of the face. I can see that he has some kind of like beard, and for that beard, I'm going to be using a slightly lighter color. For that one, I'm using Xandri Dust. And I'm applying it very, very sparingly, with almost no paint on the brush. Kind of in the to make sure that it's kind of like hair or a beard here, and it gives the face more definition, almost like he has teeth here. Now for the teeth here, I'm going to use some pure white. And these are entirely optional steps. If you want to, you can just skip them and actually put paint the base as well as the side of the base with some German dark grey, and then you simply put some varnish coat on the miniature again. But I'm going to put some teeth in here simply because I believe it can add some details. It's a bit risky to do so. Something like this. Just baring his teeth there. For the eyes, which you can't really see in the card art, I'm going to use some Warpstone Glow, which I did before, and paint them with 2 tiny dots of green. If you wanted a more evil look, you could even do red here. But I think it's a good character, so green might be nice. A tiny, tiny drop might suffice. and it might be it's not even going to be seen much. And that is actually concludes our painting for the hatchet from Jaws of the Lion. Thank you for staying with me. It's a 1 hour 10-minute video. Thank you so much for your patience. For the base, you can put some Sterling mud and some German dark grey from Vallejo on the sides. I'm not going to do that, but you can do so if you want to, and then put some varnish coat on it. If you like this miniature, if you like the way I've been showing you how to paint, despite my many mistakes and flaws, please consider pressing the like button and subscribe. Otherwise, go and put some paint on your miniatures, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.